Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, Beyond the Surface, International Students' Perspectives on Education Agents. My name is Mohit Dudeja and I'll be your moderator today for the session. We're delighted to have you with us today to dive in on a critical conversation about international education, focusing especially on education agents and the ways in which they shape and sometimes complicate the mobility journey of international students. As many of you us know, education agents serve as important intermediaries between students and institutions, but their role comes with a range of questions around transparency, conflict of interest, and the quality of advice provided. This panel will go beyond the surface to highlight the diversity of student experiences with agents, the complexities of measuring effectiveness from a student's perspective, and the broader implication for international higher education. So, before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, Dr. Pii-Tuulia Nikula, Associate Professor at the Eastern Institute of Technology. Her research critically examines international education with a particular focus on the impact of education agents in facilitating international student mobility. She's also a co-editor of a book, Student Recruitment Agents in International Higher Education. And then we have Rica Agnes Castaneda, a PhD candidate in policy studies at Toronto Metropolitan University and a researcher at the CERC in migration and integration. Her work looks closely at migration decision making within Canadian international student landscape, particularly through in-depth qualitative interviews with students from India and Philippines. And then we have Dr. Ying Yang, a postdoctoral fellow at the Education University of Hong Kong and an honorary research fellow at the University of Manchester. Her research explores education agents, access to international higher education, recruitment practices, and longitudinal qualitative methods. So we are truly honored to have such a diverse and experienced panel with us today. Over to you.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Mohit, for the introduction. I'm Pii-Tuulia Nikula. I'm usually based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but today I'm joining you from Finland. And thank you a little bit also to the introduction of agents. I will first give a little bit more background to what agents are, just in case we have people here who might not be aware of agents. And then we'll start with Ying and Rica about their research and interest in studying education agents as well. So education agents are intermediaries who guide prospective international students in choosing study destinations and institutions, as well as assist them with the application process. Many of them also offer a wide range of other services, such as language, school, testing, accommodation, and so on. And most of the focus is usually on this kind of institution contracted agents, so those who have formal agreements with educational institutions such as universities to recruit students in exchange for some kind of financial compensation, so commission payments usually. And in many of, for example, the key English-speaking destinations, most universities and most new students would contract agents and use the services of agents. So they are important, and we need to better understand the role they actually play. But there are also some independent and many independent counselors who do not actually have such contracts and are paid, for example, solely by students themselves. So it's not necessarily always, when we talk about agents, we might actually be talking sometimes about different types of actors. And in some cases, the lines also are quite blurred, and the same agent or agency may play both roles as well. I think we have a little bit noise coming from, yes, okay, thank you, yeah. And you, as you also referred to, agents can provide a very valuable service, but there are some concerns about how some of them operate. I don't know if any of you saw 2 days ago in Financial Times a story called The Shadow Economy Behind the International Student Boom. I was just 2 days ago, that discussed some of these issues and how agents were at least claimed to be selling this kind of rose-tinted version of life in the UK, how easy it is to find employment or how cheap it is going to be and so on. So I will soon ask our panelists to explain why they got interested in international student agents and the context in which they have conducted research, and what does their research actually tell us about international students' experiences and perceptions. And after that, we will discuss and reflect on some of the questions around methodology, including how best to study this topic and the limitations that may then actually affect our findings as well. And finally, we will discuss some of the emerging and future trends that might impact on the sector, and the type of research we would need to better understand the role of agents by conducting research with international students. And we'll also have time for questions and reflections from the audience. So you're welcome to share these in the chat, and then we'll take a break at some point as well if you rather unmute and ask your question or share maybe some of your experiences or reflections with us as well. So I'd like to now invite Ying and Rica to share a little bit more about how they actually became interested in the role played by agents. Maybe I could ask Ying to go first. Just a quick introduction and a little bit of how agents became kind of a topic you were interested in exploring.
Thank you, Pii-Tuulia. And hello, everyone. I'm Ying Yang, I'm postdoc fellow at Education University of Hong Kong. Agent study, for me, is so much related to my personal working and life experiences, because right after my undergraduate education, I worked for agent industry for around 5 years. During that period, I was particularly responsible for UK cases, UK application cases. And because of these kind of opportunities, I got a lot of opportunities to communicate with parents, students, engage with their decision-making process. Their reflections, concerns, or reliance on agent services made me think about the role of agents in prospective international students' choice making regarding studying abroad. And I found very, very little literature precisely, critically reflect on this role in this particular stage. So after the 5-year work in agent industry, I pursued master's program and PhD at University of Manchester, which I studied to learn students' motivations to study in UK and how agents intervened with these kind of considerations. And my PhD looked at the role of agents in this process from both students' perspective, students and education agents' perspective. Now, currently, I moved to Hong Kong. That is part of the reason was that around the end of my PhD data analysis, the data shows students shift attention to other destination countries, particularly Hong Kong. So I really want to know the Hong Kong context, what's happening, how agents play a role in this context. And so currently I'm doing kind of a pilot study around agents, how agents help students to study in Hong Kong, and how agents potentially facilitate students' employment opportunities. Because maybe later we can discuss more around their expansion services. Okay,
Yeah, good, and thank you, Ying. And this is actually a story I hear quite often. So people have been intimately involved in the industry, and then they want to take kind of those insights to research as well, which is you have those kind of different perspectives of different stakeholders that help you ask questions as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing with us. And then Rica.
Hi, so thank you, Pii-Tuulia, Mohit, and the organizers for this invitation. So my name is Rica Castaneda. I'm a researcher, the Canada Excellence and Research Chair in Migration and Integration here at Toronto Metropolitan University here in Canada. So I'm interested in studying highly skilled migrants and their migration decision making. And so for more than 3 years now, I've been doing research with international students that are in and those who are prospective, coming to Canada. And since I wanted to know more about, students' migration decision making, I examined different factors. And one of them is their use of intermediaries. And also with these, different sorts of factors, I've also noted how there's a lot of interlinked connections. And so in this course of study that I conducted, I'd say I've gained, a better understanding of the role of intermediaries, or what we call agents. And I find it interesting because, so in the Canadian context, these are not new actors in this space. And we know that, like, not even just in Canada, but, with all the other destination countries. However, the question of their conduct seems to be much more highlighted in this space in the more recent years. And so, I was thinking, and, I wanted to ask, like, is this because of the dramatic surge in international student numbers? And again, in the case of Canada, that, in 2010, there were only like 200,000 international students. And so by 2024, there are more than 1 million. So which leads us to ask, how is this possible? Can agents drive up, this much numbers? And so I'm also interested, my interest like range from different perspectives, but at the same time, with, the interviews I conducted, like qualitatively, these, the role of agents and how they affect decision making, they come up very, most of the time with, the international student narratives of the study that we have been conducting, especially on how they influence, they inform migration decision. And so initially the focus was in Indian international students, and extended this group with the Filipino international students coming to Canada.
Yes, and I might kind of continue from that in terms of the context that you've been looking at. So the international students that you were interviewing, were they undergraduate, postgraduate, or specific subject areas, or what type of students are we looking at in the study that you're conducting?
Yes, so for this study, we went broad. And so we were able to capture different international students. And by that, I meant not just demographically, like by age, but also with the programs that they're taking. So there are undergraduates, there are postgraduate students, there are students who have had their undergraduate education in their country of origin, and they're, for example, taking certificate programs. We have international students who are enrolled in both public and private institutions as well.
Okay. And Ying, you were looking in your PhD research, you were looking at student mobility to the UK. So that was predominantly Chinese students, or what was the type of student that target group that you were focusing on?
The project focuses on students from mainland China who would like to use agents to pursue master's level programs in UK and other countries. Because of COVID-19, alongside the data collection, and I found the students expand the scope. They apply for different programs from different countries. Originally, they expressed interest because they found my recruitment criteria was one of the criteria was should apply for UK PGT, postgraduate taught programs, and then found they actually look at other destination countries as well. So also involve their application experience to other countries. Yeah.
Okay. And in your research, were you able to kind of establish or find out whether these students were using institution, university contracted agents, or independent counselors? Was it something that you were able to kind of ask about, or were the students, did they know what type of agent they had been engaging with? Ying or Rica? Okay, you go first, Rica. Yeah.
But then again, I think we need to clarify, which agents we're talking about here. Because say in the case, the international students that I've worked with, the wording is very important. And so when you ask them, have you contracted an agent? Sometimes it's either they would refer to an immigration agent and or an education agent. So, and those two things are sort of different in the Canadian context, and I think very much in the different contexts as well. And so, yeah, that's another thing that we needed to clarify, probably.
Okay, so in your research, were you trying to kind of find out what type of agents they have been involved with by asking additional questions, or
Yes.
was it yes, yeah.
So
What about
there's that point of clarification. And so initially they would say, well, we didn't really, we didn't get, because, it's very much how you ask the question, right? So did you contract an education, agent, a consultant? Because apparently in some contexts or, depending on who you ask, even the word agent to them has that, in a way, some nefarious meaning, but at the same time, to some, it's more of like, it's an agent, a person who would be facilitating. So that's also, a finding that that I wanted to highlight. And so with them, so they would say, I didn't. And then later on, they would tell you about their immigration process and how they have actually, contracted an agent, an immigration agent for their visa application. So maybe to some, it's just for their studies, and then or to some, just their immigration application. And so, or to some, like the whole, process.
Yeah, great. What about you, Ying?
Actually, my research participants were not that kind of clear whether their agents have developed partnership with universities or not. But all of them were aware of the partnership relationship between the agents and universities, and also commission provision. Because some agents in the consultation stage, they highlight this kind of privilege or advantages to students. So they study to get aware of this kind of contractual relationship between university and agent. And because my recruitment criteria clarify, I need students who apply for UK university. UK is not a popular immigration country, so the agents I refer to is particularly about university application services rather than immigration services. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So maybe let's discuss a little bit of some of the key findings that you found out, or so far have found out, about international students' experiences or satisfaction with agents, and what they actually thought about the experience. So, Ying, would you like to start a little bit more about the Chinese students coming to the UK, and what were some of the key findings around their experiences?
Sure. And yeah, my recent publications show some interesting findings. One is about taken for granted understanding of using agents. But my current working paper trying to defend against this argument, try to highlight the significant yet much neglected differences between taken for granted understanding of using agents in the initial stage and their actual doing in a subsequent process. Like, because initially students, at least among my research participants, most of them initially had very blurred understanding of studying abroad. Like, in terms of particularly on the aspects of admission criteria, programs, and universities. So they really need a kind of information source to build up their understanding or knowledge around around studying abroad. So they touch different kinds of channels, such as social media and the alumni, some communities. All these channels all refer to education agents. So they just take it for granted that agents is a kind of reliable information source. But my study is a kind of a longitudinal design. So I track different stages of application. So I found the students initially, yes, they approach agents, try to learn as much as possible from agents, but it does not necessarily mean they fully follow agents saying arguments, claims, or something like that. Because the data show a significant time lag between approaching first contacting agent and finally signing agreement with agent. This kind of a time gap shows students actually gave themselves a kind of space to reflect on what they really want, what kind of information is reliable, and also these working paper shows like identifying a good agent and applying for applications early, like project themselves in a much early time, and also continuous applying for programs. These kind of things will show that students didn't take using agents for granted. They actually critically think about these services and also reflect on what they really want, why they should pursue a program abroad, and how agents can advance their positions in application games. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is
And
something
I think that's kind of sometimes in media we seem to be kind of framing international students about this kind of passive cogs in the machine that do exactly what the agent says. But in research, quite often we hear from students saying they actually they had their own agency and they made decisions on, which actors they want to work with, and they didn't necessarily trust everything that was shared with them as well. So it's good to have more of that kind of viewpoint also discussed. So they're not necessarily like a passive only in that process as such. Yeah. What about you, Rica? Like, what were some of the key things? And maybe, maybe those insights were different depending if they were talking about an immigration agent or another type of educational agent, or what were some of the kind of key findings so far from the data you have collected?
And so, I mean, because I know it, so there's that framing about the, being these international students being passive. And I would say, I mean, probably with, the range of respondents, interlocutors that I have spoken with. And so I also find it surprising that there is this sort of level of accommodation that international students have in terms of their expectations with their agents. Sometimes, they would say it was a bad experience, it was a good experience, it was bad, but they have this knowledge, like they're saying, well, I know because this agent is handling so many other international students, and so they're taking longer to respond, for example. So that sort of thing. So they've thought of that as well. But at the same time, it is frustrating every now and then that you've come across, say, for example, a couple of so folks who would say that the business of their agent is not their business, right? So sometimes there's that question of whether do you think they're conducting it properly, and then they would sort of defend them, but at the same time probably it's more of like just the understanding that they have. And so this level of detachment, I feel that maybe as Ying Yang has mentioned, that probably there's this missing literacy component on the conduct of agents, like what is expected of them, what they should be doing. And so it makes it easier for to create this wiggle room out of this misconduct, or if how they do things. So since we don't have that, for example, that sort of standards, and in the Canadian context, we don't have, I mean, we don't regulate education consultants. We have the immigration consultants, but the education consultants are not regulated. With the immigration consultants, it's just Manitoba who regulates. And so but also the question is like, is regulation the key? Is this what we want? At the same time, will it be like a blanket response in terms of governance?
And I think you kind of highlighted an important point in terms of the international students' understanding of what agent should be doing. So, for example, university contracts might give specifics about what the agent has to do, but if the student doesn't know that they're entitled to something, for example, a written contract with, their agent, or, that no fees should be charged or whatever? How are they able to kind of assess whether the agency, acted in a manner that the institution was asking as well? So I guess it is about, that limited transparency sometimes, and it's difficult to know, well, what am I actually entitled to, or what should the agent be doing? So it's sometimes quite difficult to see, I assume.
And I would say probably it's also, I mean, so it is regulatory, like there needs to be this regulatory component, because then does the university, or, does the HEI, are they saying, are they telling their agents that you should only be working with us? Because we've seen, these range of other actors who tend to, aggregate the whole process. And like, we have these like couple of universities or, colleges that you can come to. And so does that mean they have the knowledge of this whole HEI institution, the institutions that they work with? So I thought.
Okay, so overall in both of your studies, so do you believe the experience was predominantly positive or negative? And what type of concerns or issues did maybe the students then highlight as something that they didn't like that the agent was doing, or what type of concerns were raised in your studies? So maybe Ying, you can talk first more about kind of the overall satisfaction, and then if there were any issues, what type of issues were highlighted?
Sure. Actually, before my studies, I myself actually set a kind of assumptions that agents play a kind of a positive role in facilitating access to international education. Because based on my work observations, I did find at least my efforts really help some students to go abroad. Those students are from kind of a disadvantaged background because of my support. They study to learn other countries, study to learn programs, this kind of thing. But my study shows that actually agents didn't really fundamentally solve the problems, solve the issues, inequality issues, or helping facilitating their access. Because agents, especially in the UK system, most universities in UK use education agents. So in a way, universities believe agents' services, they are professional services. So they relied on agents' data set to reflect on what kind of students they want, like the quality or competence of their students, their prospective students. So universities believe agents, students study to get aware of this kind of belief, and also believe agents, in a way, believe agents advise how to strengthen their competence in application game. As a result, students try their best to boost GPAs and care so much about their first degree awarding universities, because especially in the UK context, they care so much about university background and the GPAs, especially for master's program recruitment. More and more students engage in this kind of instrumental learning. So they care so much about these kind of metrics rather than really develop their comprehensive self. For the students from low-tier universities in China, they directly excluded from the game. So in other words, they don't have any right to compete against others. They try their best for what? For nothing. When they really approach the time for submission, application submission. So agents actually help universities boost application numbers. But for students, they actually exacerbate the inequality issue emerge in this process, excluding students, especially from the low-tier universities.
Yeah, so I guess, this has been discussed by you and others in terms of kind of social reproduction and educational reproduction, on how agents might kind of play a role in that as well. And I guess to some part that pressure comes from universities, because they're saying, we want to have specific type of applications, but it's about also how the agents then, I guess, translate and make sense of those criteria, and are they playing safe, or do they actually want to kind of give a level the playing field for students as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
Rica, what about you? What type of what did the students usually overall say about the help of either migration or education agents in that process? Or were there some concerns that were kind of repeated, or were they overall usually quite happy with the experiences?
I'm glad that, Ying mentioned about, of course, depends on who you ask, like which clients, right? So you have, of course, the university as, or, the institution as the client, but also the international student as a client. And say, for example, those students who, they have worked with, consultants, agents that are tied to a certain institution, they find that, it's a positive experience. And probably because they're how the international student fees are so high that they find that it should be part, like it's expected, right, that it should be because we paid for it. So they have that positive experience as well. Those who had negative experience, it's very much on a lot of things, like really the waiting time. And I think now at this point I need to highlight, so there's the temporal aspect to it. So when I conducted this study, some international students came before the pandemic, and those who came during the pandemic, and so how they were processed around this pandemic time, they also have a different experience altogether with with the use of agents. So a lot of these are virtual, and so what it used to be that you see your agent in person, and so now you only contract some, you work with someone who you just met online, right? And so that's also that. And so in a way it detaches the, as I mentioned, there is that detachment, but they try to see it like, oh well, this agent probably they're busy, and so maybe that's why I'm getting this negative experience. But another thing that I've found out is that a lot of these students, this is not their first application process, and that's another thing. So meaning some of them, for example, they would say, oh, this agent worked with me and we lodged a couple of applications. And because, for example, in Canada there was this policy that was very specific to certain countries of origin, for example with India, that indicated that, oh, through this pathway, through this route, you will get your application. I mean, it would be faster, like there's expediency, but it didn't really work to their advantage. And so after 3 failed applications, they lodged their application on their own. So that's whole aspect as well. And so that is sort of like the negative part of it. Another thing would be because, again, these processes are not really there. There's this sort of like lack with like standards with processing and process. Some of them, for example, and so we know, for example, in this agent industry, there's this conversion factor. And so how you only, for example, some of them would only get commission. So the agents. So I didn't just interview international students. I also interview agents and stakeholders. And so, you know, it's important that the application is converted, like meaning that the student is enrolled. Now that part is tricky because even if the student, has enrolled themselves with the institution, there's still this likelihood for their visa to be denied, rejected. And so it's interesting because then, to them, they're more of, well, my money is in Canada now, what should I do, right? And so they have to like just reapply. And so it is tricky. And I would say, is that process standard, or is it very much just an incentive for the agent?
Yeah, and that also, there might be also institutions might have some specific goals for agency about conversion rates and expectations. So and there's a lot going that students might not know, why this is happening, and are they going to be compensated by the number of applications that go through, or how does that actually happen, to make kind of your own judgment then of whether this behavior was in my best interest or not as well. Yeah, and yeah, it's quite a lot of, there's a lot of like areas that remain quite hidden from the public, and we don't necessarily know, wow, how does this industry work? Yeah, great, thank you. So yeah, in a lot of the research that I have seen, overall, usually international students are satisfied with the services of education agents. So the clear majority usually says they're satisfied or highly satisfied, by usually looking at even 80% or more, or 90%. And then there's usually kind of a persistent, kind of a highly disagree, or people who are really, really unsatisfied and had those kind of bad experiences as well. But quite often, from the research data, that quite often is like survey-based or quantitative, it might be quite difficult to really see, well, what was the issue, and really kind of dig deeper into those experiences to better understand them as well. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk to you both more about kind of methodology and what's the best way of kind of doing research with international students and finding out about their experiences and perceptions as well. And that could be about research design. So, for example, Ying, you mentioned kind of the longitudinal designs that we don't usually see in this kind of area, or it could be about methods and maybe the benefits of interviews or focus groups or surveys. So, what are kind of the ways in which are the strengths of some of the methods or approaches you have used to really find out about how international students think about agents? Maybe Ying, would you want to reflect on that first, and maybe some of the reasons why you, for example, decided to choose a longitudinal design in your research?
Sure. I think my work experience really helped me a lot, because the 3-year work experience made me feel this cohort, agent user students and their parents, were quite sensitive, especially in terms of private protect their personal information. They don't really want to share their plans, study abroad plans with others. Or very close friends, they just briefly mention, oh, I'm going to study abroad, I use agents. But in terms of the details, like which programs to apply for, they don't really want to share, because they treat each other as a kind of a competitor. So they, in a way, they want to protect this kind of privacy. So I think at that time I thought, okay, I need a kind of individual discussions with them. But I also found something like students' understanding of the need changed over time. Because as a prior agent consultant, I found initially my client, my consumer, had led expectation. But as the application process progressed, they changed their mind. They didn't really like the original plan. They want to have other plan. They shift attention to other things, or other external factors influence their thinking about particular things. So they suddenly completely change the plan, the strategy, something like that. So which made me feel that I should track these changes, and which helped me to identify the dynamics and the most effective factors influencing their considerations, and whether agent play a role at a particular time point of application process. So that's why I think at that time I cared about the process. I want to capture the whole process. But as a PhD student, time, energy, kinds of resources were relatively limited. So I just selected a particular time point based on my first study, because my project involves 2 studies. One is the first study is about collect agents' perspective, how they reflect on their consumers and future consumers. Just want myself to have updated views or understanding of the students, because at least because after all I left the industry for a while, so I want to have up-to-date information and the sense of the students. And so I choose the 4 particular points of time. That is about first consultation, around the initial consultation with agents, and then select universities and prepare documents, and also finalizing the program to pursue. Also the next year, I did a kind of member tracking interview, because I really want to know after study how they reflect on agents, because I know some agents want to they still kept an eye on their prior consumers, because some of them may expect these consumers would sign agreement and may expect additional services from agents. So it would be better to keep an eye on their prior consumers, and also it's showing kind of a careness may help these students or introduce new students to the agent. So I really want to know, after 1 year of study, whether they have different thinking about agents' role. Maybe they become more critical about the services, about their study abroad experience, something like that. But now, because I have already got this kind of experience, I found it's super interesting, but I want to have a bigger understanding, like a bigger picture of a particular cohort. So I think it also depends on what kind of research questions we raise. So like this kind of pilot study, I really want to try the survey to see how this context Hong Kong, students in Hong Kong reflect on this role, because very few studies around that. So I want to have an initial understanding of that, because I see the similarity. I can assume the similarities among students, but I hope have a big picture of this cohort.
Yeah, and I guess we need both kind of are different ways of understanding the same matter. But I really liked how you talked about kind of the longitudinal design, and how in a lot of studies where that hasn't been considered or accounted for, we might actually be looking at one point in time only, and then if you had asked half a year later, or 1 year later or earlier, actually the findings might have been quite different as well. So it is something where obviously this kind of value of the more like a longitudinal design with the international students with agents, but also in other, in anything else we're interested in might be quite important. Yeah, thank you. Rica, what about you? What about you've been mainly doing qualitative interviews. So what do you think might have been some of the kind of benefits of conducting and your research that way?
So I just need to I also did the quantitative earlier, so meaning we surveyed, and so this is one of the projects that I worked on, and we did survey international students. But then again, so with surveys, we know that there are survey limitations. So how we frame the question, and it's more of like, did you contract a consultant or an agent? Were you satisfied? And and of course there is that positive. I would say from our survey respondents, they did say they had a positive experience, but then again, what does positive mean, right? And so I thought, yeah, it would have been a better, or we get the depth out of the qualitative interviews. So some of those I've interviewed were, it was very much retrospective. So there's this, they discuss it like from the past. So how, because some of them are already in Canada, so even the pre-migration, or the pre-moving experience is different. And so, and also, so, and since, so I interviewed 102 respondents, 20 stakeholders, I know, and 80 international students. And there's a part of it, so meaning, I think this is like around 65 international students. And then I did the follow-up interview after a year. And it's interesting in itself. And I would say, yes, I would recommend that longitudinal aspect to it, because so there's there's retrospective, but at the same time, so like moving after a year, and some of them have graduated, or some of them have moved on, some of them are still in the middle of their program. And there is that also, how they change, or how their experience with agents are still there. So meaning there's still that aspect that the agents now, some agents are helping them find housing. Some agents are thinking of like how they would navigate this tricky part with Canadian immigration, like how they shift to the next category, right? So that is also an aspect that was touched on with the longitudinal views. I would say, sorry.
I think also earlier you also referred to how sometimes in the interviews, that you kind of found out that the agent definition is not so clear, and people were actually talking about different things with that as well. Yeah.
Yes, and because I think we also talked about, for example, with the surveys, they can say they did or they did not, but then in the middle of the survey, they do realize that, oh, it is an agent that I worked with. But then again, some surveys, they don't have that back button. So meaning they can change their mind, right? And so in interviews, they would, there's this probably that length of time that you speak with them, then they do realize, and, there's that thought process as well.
Yeah. So I'd like to kind of ask you too, so quite often universities and other education providers, when they somehow try to assess the quality of the agents they have contracted, so quite often what they say they do is they ask for student feedback. So that quite often might be like a survey. Sometimes it might be a focus group or an interview, but did you have kind of anything you wanted to talk about assessing the quality of agent based on student feedback data only, on what might be some of the limitations of that as well? Rica or Ying?
Rica, you go first.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead. Sorry. Now we're all shy. But okay, I would say, for example, there has been instances that, we tried contacting certain, institutions and, conducting the survey, right? And sometimes some of them were ambivalent, like they don't like it. And sometimes it's framed that it's good because then they get to gauge student satisfaction. But there's a lot of pushback as well, because then it might turn not so great. And so that's another thing. I mean, it's understandable. And so we come in and we might look like, we are the independent, study coming in. And so that's why probably it's broader. Our recruitment was broader because we didn't stick with just a certain, say, institution, because they didn't let us.
Yeah. So some institutions can be quite protective of that type of data. They don't necessarily want to make it publicly available. And sometimes also it might be about, for example, not having resources really to collect that type of feedback. Maybe some of the questions that I've been kind of reflecting on is when institutions kind of ask their own students about, well, how did you like your agent, so they can kind of then have information about the specific actors. Some of the issues around language and maybe students' knowledge about, again, what the agent's applications might be. Sometimes I think it might be that longitudinal, the timing, if we survey the students when they have just arrived, do they actually know whether the reality meets what the agent was saying? Or if we survey them too late, maybe they already forgot what the agent was talking about, and aspects like that as well. And also that sometimes when we institutions survey students, they don't really tell the student, this is what the agent should have taught, guided you for, or this is kind of what our agreement with the agent looked like. So did you know about it? So so sometimes I think maybe if we ask students only, we might not really the way it's usually done, we might not actually really get like a comprehensive information about how the agent actually acted. Any ideas from that, Ying, that you'd like to reflect on more?
Yeah, in terms of these kind of information indications, I personally not that kind of a belief. Think they are this kind of information is reliable, because these kind of surveys might not be completed by students themselves, because as I know that agent user students tend to use a kind of a separate email account or email address, which was created by agent. So agents manage the emailed account. They help students to respond to universities' inquiries or these kind of surveys. Perhaps very likely agents help them to complete the surveys. So in a way, university can't really get students' voices about how qualified their agents are. And also, as you mentioned, students may not have a full understanding of agents and the relationship between agents and universities. Maybe they just base on their application results. Agents can help me to go to elite university. Okay, satisfied, because they are kind of a result-oriented cohort. Also because it also depends on when, what time, what stage, in which stage at which stage we ask students to complete the surveys. Like longitudinal shows, the students change minds over time. So at this time point, maybe I got a very satisfying application result. I'm happy. So I said everything is good. But if I got rejection, I feel no, so bad. I wish everything is bad. So it's not that kind of critical information in a way. In terms of how we in what way we can relatively critically understand agents, services, or quality? I think triangulate different perspective, triangulating different perspective is super important. Like students, universities, agents, and make contrast and comparisons of their reflections, which can help us identify some inconsistency or consistency in terms of the services, in terms of the needs, in terms of the challenges students encounter or university encounter or agent encounter, something like that. So I think multiple perspectives are quite necessary in terms of understanding the need of agents.
Yeah, that triangulation I also believe would be much more helpful rather than kind of rely on a one specific indicator. And there might also be instances where the interest of the international student and the agent might align, but they might breach the interest of the university. So obviously we're not going to find out about those issues by asking the student, because they might be kind of, well, this is the truth, but obviously I can't disclose it to you. But I already kind of forgot how important the point you made about that many agents kind of use and have control of the email that the institution might have access to as well. So we might think we're collecting international students' views, but we are actually collecting agents' views of how great they were. So that's a great point to make as well, that kind of again highlights that there might be some limitations in that data for universities. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add, Rica, still about that topic?
Yes, and as you mentioned that, it's funny because when we were recruiting for international students, some who responded were agents. It was, and so, you schedule an interview and then all of a sudden, no one wants to open their webcams. And then, you find out. And so that's, more of a, well, we can interview you as well, but then again, you're not an international student. So that's also.
Okay, yeah, that's quite interesting as well. So yeah, I guess if institutions would be doing more like focus groups or interviews on campus, then they'd probably have a little bit higher confidence that the people who show up are actually the people that they wanna be talking to. But I guess in any industry and organizational research, like in academic, it's always about the time resources. So Rica, listening to your number of interviews really made me already thinking about where do you find all of the hours to do 100 plus interviews. But yeah, well done. I'm sure it will be really, really valuable data that you've been collecting. Yeah. I'd like to open questions for our audience as well at the moment. So I don't know if you have any questions, Mohit, at the moment in the chat, or if not, then if you have any questions or reflections or maybe your own experiences, we'd love to hear from them as well. And we'd also.
Yeah, so I
Mohit,
don't.
we can't hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't see anything in chat. So I would request people, if you have any questions, you can ask by unmuting yourself or raise your hands or share in chat. I would meanwhile like to share that, so I have had experiences where I ask students about, like, sometimes in just my friends group, like, why you chose the college or the university that you chose. And they're like, oh, my agent gave me that. And, I didn't know nothing. Especially because I live in Thunder Bay. And for me, the process was like I never applied through an agent. So for me, it was like reaching out to professors and requesting them to supervise, and then finding a fit in that sense. Uh, and I also sort of felt like, especially in India, applying through an agent can be a privilege in a way, because for those who may not be able to afford the money or do not have that sort of awareness would not really would not really know, how to reach out through agents or apply through agents. But at the same time, it is also a disadvantage because those who are not aware, how to really apply or go forward with the study abroad will just rely completely on agents. And then in most cases, I've also heard that, how they're disappointed after coming to Canada because, you know, for them it was Canada, not Thunder Bay, which is definitely not Toronto, right? I mean, I love Thunder Bay, it's great, but that's just me. Not everybody, loves mostly a rural part of, Canada. So, yeah, so that was, a great insight. And I was able to relate when, you were sharing. Especially, and to your point, Yin Yang, where you were sharing about who really already gets discriminated against, when it comes to the selection process, or not really included. So I have students from the University of Delhi, so in the University of Delhi, there are still some departments who follow the British way of marking system, right? So that's what the Britishers have left in India. So that means like the highest score would be like in high of 60s, so 65, 70. That's the highest score that anybody would get. So there is like a whole class of philosophy program, both bachelor's and master's, where the highest score of the class would be like 68%. But the universities in Canada will not consider them for a PhD program or a master's program given the low score. So I have had cases where students provided the list of scores of the entire class, and in this particular case, there was like out of 150 students, only 38 passed the course, the program, and the highest was 68. This student had 60% and was rejected multiple times, right? So the idea of equity and even just understanding, right, that what the grading scale was, and and then later the student was actually admitted in a university in Canada, and they scored 90% throughout the program. So yeah, I just wanted to share that insight.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
sometimes agents can help with that as well, because they can provide the context to the institutions, and quite often the institutions would then go and find more information about, well, is this actually correct or not. So sometimes that can be helpful, because then the agent might be able to kind of convince the institutions to look beyond it, rather than you sending your own application and just having to take the reject as well. I was rejected. What can I do next one as well? But yeah, Ying, you go and share any of the other insights you might have.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the point about agents help students to be admitted, and because of the marketization, I think it's a globally marketized higher education system. So more and more universities expect to recruit more students, international students, by expanding their programs. So one of my recent publication about Shui programs is about watered down programs at elite universities, like for example, you are in a business school, your university, that is a kind of a strong program, strong, very influential departments or something around the world. So super competitive in terms of getting admission to the to that department. But that department would like to expand their student numbers, so they started to mix different kinds of related the courses together and mix them together, develop a kind of program, lower their admission criteria. So agents are quite good at spotting, identifying these kind of emergent programs for the students who really are eager for getting into the elite universities. They also value, very, very value these kind of services, because for students, this kind of information might, as opposed to agents, they are not that kind of sensitive, and agents are quite responsive to universities' changes, or like expansion of the programs and some policies. So yeah, in a way, while some programs have a very strict criteria. They still have their different routes to help students get into these kind of elite universities or departments.
Did you come across any students who had help with from agents for PhD admissions?
I actually didn't interview students who prepare PhD, but I did because member tracking, when I conducted member tracking interviews, that is around the end of their UK programs, that is actually their time to consider whether they should pursue PhD or not. So some of them reflect on something about their considerations around PhD application. They found that is a completely different stories because different case, because PhD, the first thing is about potential supervisors. In their eyes, the supervisors have absolute power to decide whether you can get admitted or accepted or not. So how to spot watered down supervisors, maybe that is a key question for students. Especially some students, they just care about degrees. So yeah, they did find some watered down supervisors at elite universities, but how to perform themselves as a kind of committed PhD applicant, agents have some kinds of strategies to help them to be that kind of applicants, competitive applicants. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So in like my experience, I have found that even the agents who are like directly connected to the university, so they're like, in Canada, this is how it works. They also said that we don't help with PhD admissions. They just clearly said no. And I think that's probably to do with the incentives because in PhD programs, mostly fully funded, so probably they don't get any incentives and hence, they do not help. So yeah, there's that. But anyway, we have some questions for you on the chat. We have just comment that says that oftentimes agents push certain universities for their incentives rather than students' best interest, and students often fall for this. So that's just a comment. We'll move to the next question, maybe. So,
I can address that comment.
okay, yeah. Please, for
Example, there has been cases of say, some colleges or some institutions, it's 99% international students. And so that in itself shows us that there is that aspect wherein maybe not just agents, but there is that you populate a certain institution with just international students.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I have had so many such cases, and have any of you watched The Fifth Estate? There's this episode by Fifth Estate on international students and how, especially in India, the agents are sort of misleading students, and there's like cases of the Alpha College and all of that where that's there. But yeah, as you said, there's like both kind of pictures. There's that negative picture that's painted, but there's also a positive picture. For instance, how you mentioned Yin Yang, like they can also help students find their ways even if the universities first reject them. So that's good. Okay, so the next question is, did you find any correlation between the role institutions played in the negative experiences of these students with the agents? Do you want me to highlight the question on chat?
I can first maybe talk about it a little bit. So in my research, I quite often highlight how it is actually the responsibility and accountability of the institutions, because the institutions decide which agents they want to work with. And obviously, some institutions are much more strict. They do better due diligence. They train their agents better. And some are really less fair. They don't even provide training for the agents, and they don't really have any other kind of monitoring than potentially just asking the agent, how did you do this year? So I think overall, yes, it is to some extent depending on what institution.
I wasn't able to come to today's one, but
Okay.
I'm interested in coming to the new one. I think it's
Thursday,
Yes.
tomorrow.
Is it
We've got tomorrow at 7.
So sorry for that.
That's okay. It happens in this, yeah. So definitely to some extent it is dependent on what the institutions do, and also some institutions, for example, very aggressively, pay super high commissions because they really need the volumes in. And they say, well, we don't really care who comes in or what the ethical kind of principles around that recruitment is. So yeah, sometimes institutions are complicit in what's going on as well. And others are trying to do their best to train agents and make sure that both the agents and the students are well informed. So I think there's quite a difference between the type of kind of approach that institutions take. Whether there's kind of data that would show quantitatively the correlation, probably not. So it's more kind of based on some of those kind of, I guess, case studies where you would see good and bad potentially, but maybe Ying or Rica have some better insights there as well.
I completely agree with all the points you just raised. And along with you saying, let me think of the case I have ever dealt with. That is about boarding school. It's not higher education. And at that time, the agents actually just starts like a boarding school business in the UK, like recruit, help UK boarding schools recruit Chinese students. At that time, that school actually didn't provide a kind of reliable information. They just took pictures, and they did give us a kind of a training. Kind of generate a kind of illusion that is a fantastic, amazing boarding school, and we believe so, and so that we tried our best to disseminate, promote that school. Some parents believe us and finally sent their children to that school. But after just 2 months later, we received kinds of complaints because that is really in terms of the quality, adequate facilities, kinds of conditions, like accommodation conditions, are completely different from what they showed us. So it's not just about agents maybe generate kind of fake information or mislead students. Sometimes like education providers also do this kind of thing. They just need students so that they generate a kind of a fake information and expect agents to help them to promote. So outsiders may just make kinds of complaints about agents, but actually the real problem comes from the education providers itself. So I think we need to critically think about who actually generates these kind of information asymmetries. Yeah. So I think information transparency plays a significant role in recruitment campaigns.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Rika?
I would say also the promise that was made. And so, for example, you have, say, the agent or the education institution, what type of promises were made. And I think it applies very much on the Canadian context, that there is that possibility to immigrate later on. And so, for example, not all programs and not all institutions have that. They are not all designated learning institutions. So we have this DLI concept. But at the same time, even within the designating learning institution, there are programs that will not allow them to move on. And so that sort of gets obscured every now and then. And so that promise, and so you leave these international students coming in, and what options do they have after they're done with, their program. And so that, what was promised that is that they'll get, PR very easily, right? And so it doesn't really happen that way, and that needs to be communicated more, and that needs to be clear.
Yep, totally. So I've changed some settings, so now I'll have to unmute you whenever you have to speak. But anyway, so yeah, does anybody else want to add anything, or otherwise we can go to the next question? Okay, so we have a comment. Thank you for sharing your research. I have found that a lot of university staff are really unaware of the role of agents. So, thank you for shedding light on it. I often wonder if this ignorance at any institution level in some way is deliberate. So, if you would like to address that comment, or yeah.
Yes, sometimes in research with education providers and people responsible for agent management, there is this kind of ignorance is a bliss type of approach, or if we don't know about it, then, it wasn't kind of our fault. So there's definitely some institutions that rather not know, or just very have that superficial type of information to say, yeah, I mean, students are happy with our agents. That's all we need to kind of know, and we get the volumes we need as well. So I think there as well, yes, sometimes that's the case. But the issue is also that it's quite often very difficult to find out what's actually happening. So if you want to really start monitoring your agent, it can be quite costly and time consuming. So it's more about the institutional resourcing. And quite often agent-based recruitment is kind of seen this low-cost model, but it's only low cost if you do it badly, or not really interested in what the agents are actually doing, and making sure you're also supporting and training your agents. And if you do it correctly and more responsibly, then actually it's not a low-cost model anymore. And it comes from those kind of financial pressures that we know that a lot of institutions in the UK and Canada and Australia and other countries are currently having. And they really need to have those kind of the money coming in, and they don't necessarily have it to resource staff and functions around it. Yeah.
Yep, totally.
I have something to add with in regards to, so we have private institutions here in Canada, and there has been instances that I was able to interview stakeholders who work around that space. It's also different that, their agent use, it's not, it can be a consortium of private institutions. So, and meaning their agents can be offshore, onshore, it can be on-site, off-site. So that's, it's a different, I would say, different beast altogether. But it's interesting to note, because then even to them, I have one who manages, these student expectations, like someone is assigned that. And so, for example, it would be flagged that this student is an influencer, and the influencer, whenever, he or she sends an email, they sort of get, a much more on time response, that sort of thing. And so I thought that's very interesting.
Yes, totally. And especially with the changes in the immigration, the student visa program, and now they don't get post-graduation work permit with private institutions. So that has also impacted that.
Yeah, and also based on my observations, now more PhD students actually engage with agents business as well. They themselves are agents, help students to prepare application documents because they claim themselves as a kind of insiders. So they want to get some money, it's a kind of quick, easy money for them. So, and also some professors, especially in STEM fields, they have labs, collaborate with agents to develop a kind of a pay fee charge internship for programs or research programs, especially during the holidays or summer holidays. So agents can send some students to their labs to do some basic work or just have a tool visit, something like that. And then they will have a kind of certificate. This is really kind of a consequence of marketization of higher education, to be honest. So I'm not sure whether they don't really know agents or they really want agents exist because they they need them for kinds of a reasons. I think it's quite complicated.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So with that, we have another question. I would be curious to hear your thoughts after all the challenges you have outlined today. Do you feel the use of education agents is an ethical practice?
I think it's about how you use them. So again, I will always look look towards institutions and what are they doing. And again, it could be done well and it could be an ethical practice. But I think currently, just the way it actually works in practice, it leaves a lot of gaps and it puts a lot of, there's a lot of risk for the student in engaging agents. But there's also a lot of risk doing it yourself. So, and or using somebody else. So we have also, in other research, a lot of it's a bit outdated, seeing how, for example, students said that their guidance from the embassy was biased, and and it, even if you talk to your school counselor, they also are going to be influenced by their own preferences and understandings and so on. But obviously, often with the contracted agent model, the student doesn't really know what's happening behind their back, and there might be a commission payment if they go to a specific institution, a bit higher payment if they go to another institution, so it kind of adds another layer. So currently there's a lot of issues in transparency, and a lot of incentives that don't really take the students' best interest at heart, because agents are compensated on kind of volume based, and then this kind of other type of monitoring is weaker. So there's a lot of agents that add a lot of value, and they really help students to make good decisions and make the process easy and sometimes even possible. And sometimes the student might not be able to go anywhere without an actor. So it's such a diverse field. So it's like asking, well, should we have higher education if there's some kind of bad apples in the system as well? I think at the moment they're probably still adding more value than destroying value, but really we should together lift the standards, as Rica is referring to, and institutions should invest and resource this type of agent management services better to ensure that we have a bit more of an understanding what's happening in the field.
Yeah, but I really resonate with Pii-Tuulia's point about how we use them. It really matters. And I also believe that as more students studying abroad, the information around studying abroad or applications is getting more transparent. In a way, it will enhance students' sense of agency. They are not easily be manipulated by agents anymore. They have their own judgment, understanding of the value of agents. Yeah, and also they have their own evaluation or understanding of universities' use of agents. So yeah, it's associated with different stakeholders rather than just students themselves. Yeah, like UK system, the tendency of using agents in a way sends a kind of message is ethical practice. So for students, I think, okay, I can use agents, but how students use agents, in what ways, to what extent, it also depends on students' understanding of these application experiences or process.
My end, I think it's very much, why do you use these agents, these facilitators, right? Facilitators of mobility. And there is, of course, that risk component to it, that, a lot of these students, they see that there is an expert. Like you see this, it's your first time applying for something, and probably it's, you need someone to guide you. And so in that process, they are helpful. And again, we shouldn't be discounting the agency, that they can take the advice, they can leave the advice as well. And so, but at the same time, we know that some advice can be cheap, some advice are expensive. Another thing is, of course, the element of time. Some of them are not really, they're time strapped, they're very busy, and so they need this facilitator as well, and just to go around their whatever needs for an application. So whether or not it's ethical, I think it's very much on the practice, right? And so whether you allow someone to facilitate your move is not really more of like a question of ethics, but like how you do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we also need agents because the immigration system in itself is sort of tricky. For instance, like if you do not mention in your visa application that I will return to my country after completing my education, that's a big reason for rejection. And that's a very small key point, but often people just don't know. It's only the agents who would, highlight that. And at the same time, I also feel like, uh, you know, how it is like when one of the models that is followed in India is that there is multiple institutions that join an education fair, and where they all just share about their institution, and then students can make an informed choice based on what they share, as opposed to one agent pushing for a certain university. So I think in that sense it's more ethical, and not really pushing like one university or an agent. So yeah. um, okay, so we have one more comment. There's an ongoing debate whether agents need to be regulated. What are your thoughts on the matter? If yes, who the regulator should be? There are different approaches in different countries. AQF in the UK, but it is voluntary and soft touch. What do you think has worked best elsewhere?
So first of all, obviously, there are specific country contexts where there has been direct regulation on agents, such as China was trying to do that within China, Vietnam. I think Bhutan has a model of regulation as well. But I guess the question here is more about whether we should have regulation that forces educational institutions to manage their agent in a specific way, like in AQF in the UK, the Manitoba system in Canada, or Australia and New Zealand as well, because government in the UK can't regulate offshore agents because they don't actually have legislative ways to do that. But what they can do is they can have regulation or legislation in place that requires their educational institutions to do A and B and C and D when working with agents. So from the Australia and New Zealand experiences where we have had legislation regulation in this area in place since kind of early 2000 for agent management, it has definitely lifted the standards. And especially those that are kind of black and white requirements are quite easy to monitor. But there's still a lot of kind of gray area of, well, what does it actually mean? That you have to train your agents. Well, is it enough if I send them a flyer and say, oh, look at our website, that's my training? So there's kind of a lot of areas where, there's so much, what does it actually mean type of questions. And the second thing is that the oversight in Australia and New Zealand has been really limited. There's very little where the regulator has then said, okay, no, you're not doing this correctly, and now there will be some kind of penalties or consequences. So basically, it is there as a framework, but unless it's going to be enforced, and there's a bit more of a, again, independent data collection in terms of how the agents actually behave, then the regulator often has very limited knowledge of what's going on, and they trust whatever the education provider says. Okay, well, we did A and B and C. Well, did it actually lead to anything, and did you do it effectively? So I am supportive of having government regulation more, but again, I don't believe it's going to be that kind of miracle that's going to help us to fix all the issues. And also, there could be some kind of other unintended consequences around it that we have to be aware of.
Yeah. I want to add something around. I was aware that I just feel the host countries, host universities don't have enough understanding of the sending countries information around the local market. So they don't really understand, like Pii-Tuulia mentioned, they don't really know what agent actually did for students. They're just based on their data. I think that is completely insufficient. So, and also like university admission criteria, this kind of thing. Just like universities generate uncertainties, generate ambiguous information to the potential students. So it's not just about regulate agents' practices, universities themselves, they are keep generating problems also. So I think might need more systematic research around this, especially application process, recruitment process, what particular stakeholders involved, what kind of information matter, who generates information, who delivered information, who received information, how they perceive kinds of information. So far, there's still very limited study, particularly on this topic. So that's why I think a kind of framework don't really play a role in terms of regulating agents' practices in recruitment campaigns.
Yeah, I agree.
It's funny because I was just reading an article about whether to regulate or not, and very much I think it's the the China context wherein they did try to regulate at a certain point and then they did not, and so whether it controlled immigration flow, it didn't. So there's still an increase of immigration. So I find that interesting. At the same time, I'm thinking I would agree on regulating, and it's very much on setting standards because we need those standards to get to get these stakeholders at the same time, this service providing actors in check. Like they need, and also, and the client end, for them to know what to expect, at the same time for them to demand things that what needs to be done. But then also I thought of it of more of like now thinking that maybe there won't be how, again, like as Pii-Tuulia has mentioned, whether it would be that miracle pill, I'm not sure. However, now that and more than ever, we have this set of eyes, the community in itself has been much more, I would say, we there's advocacy coming from the community, and I think we should use that this community of practice, wherein we are saying we are setting norms within the community, and therefore this that sort of create that atmosphere within the community, or say community of agents, that someone gets called out that you're not doing it properly, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So it seems like we do not have any more questions on the chat. So what do we do? So do we like wrap up, or do you have anything else to add, any of you? Okay, I don't see anything. So as we wrap up, I would like to extend my gratitude, first of all, to our panelists, Dr. Pii-Tuulia Nikula, Rica Agnes, and Dr. Ying Yang. We also have some thank yous on the chat. Today's discussion has reminded us that international student mobility is not just about policies and numbers, it's also about the lived realities of students and the intermediaries who influence their choices and trajectories, which is like very important. Thank you as well to our audience for joining us today and engaging with us, for your insightful questions. And we hope the session sparks further dialogue and reflection in your own context. On behalf of Research with International Students, I would like to thank all of you once again, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We have lots of upcoming events. So, yes, thank you so much. Okay, bye.